As we're talking about the housing market, obviously this is going to help certain people. We've touched on the story of the problems with cladding in other places and deluged with calls from people. There's roughly 3 million people who are trapped in their homes, whether they are local authority owned or they own them, by this cladding. What are you doing about that?
Well, I've seen some of your programmes on this and heard some of your callers, and I have great empathy with people who are in this situation. There are very large numbers of people who've done the right thing, have purchased a property, it was their dream to do so, and then they found that they have a property which either has some unsafe cladding which needs to be removed, or it may not do, but they've struggled to sell the property because they don't have the form that's been created, or they're struggling to get hold of a form that's been created by the industry which will enable them to do so. We're working with the industry to resolve this. This is a complex and difficult challenge, but we're doing a number of things. Firstly, we've made available £1.6 billion to help to remove cladding on the most unsafe buildings. So we've prioritised, in the first instance, the kind of cladding that was on Grenfell Tower, which is called ACM, and then more recently we've just created a second fund which is for other types of cladding which are perhaps less unsafe than ACM, but nonetheless need to come off buildings over 18 metres. And that fund is now available, and we're working through those applications, and we want to ensure that helps people to get the cladding off as quickly as possible.
You say over 18 metres, but you're aware of the changes that were brought in January, aren't you, Secretary of State?
Well, I brought them in, Nick.
So just remind the listeners what was you brought in.
Well, the expert advice is that 18 metres is an important determinator of risk. That the higher your building is, the more difficult it is to evacuate people. So in terms of regulation and in terms of any in terms of any investment the government makes, prioritising above 18 metres is what the experts say. But obviously it's quite crude to simply say that risk begins at 18 metres. And so at the beginning of the year, taking the experts' advice, we amended our guidance to say that you also needed to take a more nuanced approach to risk and look at buildings individually. And so in addition to height, you should look at other factors and decide how safe a building is, taking into account a range of factors. And that means that you buildings below 18 metres, in some cases, need to also think about their
safety. Even though you could get out the window in the event of a fire, if you're on the ground floor?
Well, it depends, doesn't it? There's a range of factors.
You get out the window.
Well, it might depend on what the use is. Well, it might. Well, Nick, it might depend on what the use of the building is. For example, so if you're a care home, then you might well have residents on the ground floor, but actually you need to take into account how the building is being used, as well as what materials have been used to construct it.
Secretary of State, there are 3 million people effectively trapped in their homes, some of whom their home is worthless, zero. You've just talked about £11.5 billion to help with affordable homes. What are you doing about these individuals?
Well, we're doing a number of things. Firstly, we're bringing forward some government funding to help to accelerate the removal of the cladding on the most dangerous buildings. So when will the removal
be done?
Well, on ACM cladding, which is the most dangerous type of cladding, which was on the Grenfell Tower, around 70% of buildings that have that on them now have either had it removed or are in the process of removing it. That leaves far too many which have yet to have it fully removed. But the vast majority of those now have a plan to do so. And we have a team of people who are working with every one of those buildings. And I meet them regularly. In fact, I met the team yesterday and went through each of those buildings. And we're working with them to ensure that cladding comes off as quickly as possible.
This is what I don't understand. The government estimate is that it takes £3 billion to remove the cladding. You've pledged £1.6 billion, but you found £11.5 or £12 billion for this other scheme. Why aren't you looking after those other people who are in dangerous buildings? Why are you building new homes when there are dangerous ones you haven't addressed? It seems a very strange set of priorities. Define why you'd do that. You're leaving people in effectively fire traps, but you're building new homes. Now talk to me about the logic of that, Secretary of State.
Well, I think it's extremely important to be investing in new social and affordable homes. So I think you agree with that.
I don't know about you, but I think it's quite important that we don't have another Grenfell, don't you?
Well, I do think that. That's
right.
why
so
we're
why
working
are we
extremely
spending
hard
£12
to
billion
alleviate
on
that.
building new homes when we've got dangerous ones still in existence? For the second time, explain the logic of that, if you would, Secretary of State.
Well, because this isn't just about government investment. We are investing a significant amount of money to help get the process going faster than it is today. But there's also other routes in which this is being funded. For example, with ACM, a great deal, which is the most dangerous type of cladding, a lot of these buildings have been funded through warranty claims, through the developers themselves.
The
paying
developers
for
in
it.
many instances aren't paying. Why am I telling you this?
Well, they have paid in.
You're in charge
They actually
of the
have.
housing brief,
Well,
and
they
I'm
have
telling
actually
you.
paid in. No, you're wrong, actually, Nick. The developers have paid in a number of cases.
But in many they're not. You must be aware of that. In many they're refusing to. You've got recalcitrant and possibly rather dodgy builders who aren't helping these people out. You must be aware of this.
Yeah, I am aware of that, and that's
Right.
precisely why at the budget, the Chancellor and I announced the £1 billion fund to help with non-ACM cladding, and that's now
But we know it's three.
we've welcomed applications. That's been launched, and that work will now commence. There's obviously a lot more that needs to be done here, Nick, because what we're looking at here is that we are a country that has neglected the issue of building safety for a very long time. We've had a building safety system which is not sufficiently strict. A number of buildings have been built without the right safety checks, and we now need to work through those progressively as quickly as possible, understand where the issues are, and make the changes. And we are putting some government funding in that. We're also changing the law so that there's much stricter regulation. We're bringing in a building safety regulator, and we're passing a piece of legislation which we've just published, which will be the biggest change in either of our lifetimes to building safety regulation.
Okay.
We've banned the most dangerous materials like the cladding on Grenfell Tower, and we're working very closely with the lenders as well to ensure that we can try to free up the very challenging issue we've got at the moment,
Lastly on this subject,
which is blocking people from moving home.
Secretary of State, lastly on this subject, when was the last time you were in a building with cladding?
Well, I've visited a number. I mean, there are a number of buildings with cladding all around us. There are tens of thousands of buildings
Yes. When
which
was
have
the
cladding
last
on
time
them.
you visited one and spoke to some of the residents about their concerns?
I've spoken to constituents who came to my surgery just a couple of weeks
When
ago
was the
who
last
have
time
this
you went
situation.
into a building with cladding and spoke to the residents, whether residential, elderly people, young people, whatever? When was the last time you visited one and spoke to those people?
Well, I went just before COVID to go and visit a number of residents in the Greenwich area where their cladding, a type of cladding called HPL, is being removed.
Right.
I met
and what were they
residents and I
saying?
met the
Presumably they
builders.
told you of their desperation, did they?
Look, this is a very difficult situation. I've been working with them, I've been listening to them, I have correspondence from them all the time, and I want to do everything I can to help them.
Do you?
And we're trying
Well,
to do that.
Do you?
We're
Because
doing
you
that on
found £12 billion to build new homes and nothing like enough to sort these people out finally, have you, Secretary of State?
Well, we found £1.6 billion. That's
Which
a
is
very
not enough.
significant
We've been down this road
amount
already,
amount of money. We're now working through the applications to our fund, which we've had a lot of applications from across the country. And the purpose of that fund was to get this moving faster, because it's not an acceptable situation that it's taking so long to remove the most dangerous forms of cladding from buildings.
I'm grateful for your time.